Hi, everybody. Welcome to English Digest. I'm Tom.
Hi, I'm Stephanie.
Well, it's not actually English Digest today. It's actually News Digest. And it's also our all-English lecture. So we're going to be speaking completely in English today. Maybe with a word or two thrown in from a different language because we have to, but we will be speaking mostly in English today. We'll try to avoid speaking Chinese. Oh, we love the chance to speak Chinese. That's why we're here in Taiwan. We're here to study Chinese and things like that. And being able to host this all-English lecture is very painful. I really don't want to be restricted. I really want to speak some Chinese, but I can't.
I was talking to a friend yesterday, and we were laughing about the fact that neither one of us speak one language when we're doing sentences sometimes. There's always, she'll start out with Chinese and then she'll throw in English, and I'll start out with English and throw in Chinese. Yeah. People kind of mix things up these days, but when we do our all-English lecture, we try to do two things. Speak more slowly, because sometimes we just speak too quickly, and also not speak any Chinese, and also we don't have our Chinese teacher either. So.
Yep. Chinese teacher needs to take a break from time to time. We'd like to think that we have this all-English lecture for you so you can practice your listening comprehension ability.
Sure.
But actually, it's so our teacher can have the day off. So, yeah, it's an all-English lecture today. No, it's actually for all of your benefit there. I'm just joking. But today we're going to be talking again about the COVID-19 problem that still seems to be around in the world. And one area of the economy that has been affected by COVID-19 has been tourism. Okay, people who work in restaurants and hotels and stuff like that have been affected by this problem. They're losing income and they're probably not able to take care of their families and stuff like that. So what will it take for tourism to recover from COVID-19? We want everything to return to normal as soon as possible.
Yeah, I've been really sad walking around Taiwan. That's kind of how I get my exercise. I like to walk. And a lot of my favorite restaurants have closed, or a favorite store has shut down. And we know that the hotels have had a hard time because, Taiwan just shut its borders. You couldn't come in at all. So, yeah, it's been really hard on a lot of people. So we're going to talk about what people are kind of tossing around ideas on how to help the tourism industry, which is a big deal here in Taiwan. We've got a lot of beautiful places that people from other countries want to come and see. And the Taiwanese are really famous for being very hospitable, very kind, very warm. And I totally agree with that. We're going to do what we always do, guys. We're going to read through the whole lecture, and then we'll be back to talk about some of these phrases and, of course, our vocabulary words.
The COVID-19 pandemic has had a destructive impact on the global tourism industry. In May 2020, the United Nations World Tourism Organization declared that the amount of international tourist arrivals could decrease by 60 to 80% compared to 2019. For the hundreds of millions of people working in tourism around the world, these statistics could come with dreadful consequences. That's why many governments are looking for ways to keep their tourism industries afloat. For instance, New Zealand and Australia have pledged to institute a travel bubble or travel corridor between their two countries as soon as it's safe to do so. This would allow residents of both countries to travel from one to the other without needing to go into quarantine. Vietnam and Thailand, two countries that rely heavily on tourism, have also explored similar schemes. The idea of opening borders is still far off for countries hit hardest by the virus. Meanwhile, others, including Thailand, are contemplating the establishment of special tourist zones. Local residents of these zones, along with the foreign tourists who travel there, would be confined to these areas. This would allow for foreign travel while still keeping a type of quarantine in place. Another idea that's being considered is an immunity passport, a document that would indicate a traveler's immunity to COVID-19 or their vaccination status. However, with years of scientific research needed to turn such a prospect into reality, it's unlikely that immunity passports will find their way into the global spotlight anytime soon. For now, all that's clear is that significant measures and a lot of patience will be needed to get the tourism industry back on its feet.
Okay, guys, what will it take for tourism to recover from COVID-19? Wow, that's a big question there. But we really need to help the tourism industry. I know a lot of families were hit pretty hard because, tourism just kind of stopped. Even in Taiwan, where, we know the Taiwanese like to travel around and see the sights. People like to get out, especially on the weekends. When we first shut down everything, when schools were shut down, remember that long ago? I don't know about you guys, but most people were staying home. People were not going out to eat at restaurants, in my neighborhood at least. People who always ate out before COVID arrived were actually trying to cook at home. They were nervous. So, how are we going to bring back the tourism industry? That's a good question.
It is. So the COVID-19 pandemic has had a destructive impact on the global tourism industry. So if something's destructive, it causes destruction. It damages things. And indeed, as you said, the tourism industry has suffered greatly because of this pandemic. And in May 2020, or 2020, the United Nations World Tourism Organization declared that the amount of international tourist arrivals could decrease by 60 to 80% compared to 2019. So just a year later, in 2020, the UN World Tourism Organization declared something. They said that, yes, the amount of international tourist arrivals will go down by 60 to 80% compared to last year. So that's what they declared. They did some research and they came to some conclusions and they thought, yes, people traveling and arriving in various places for fun, well, that number will go down by 60 to 80%. So if you're a travel agent or if you run a hotel or a restaurant or a touring company or something like that, you're going to suffer.
Well, the UN isn't known for being accurate with their predictions, so I'm not going with this. I'm hoping it'll get a lot better pretty soon. So the hundreds of millions of people working in tourism around the world, hearing these statistics can really make them depressed. So statistics, not a statistics. Statistics is a plural form of this word. I remember having to take this class in college, and it was kind of hard for me. Statistics is a part of math, and it's taking a lot of data and looking at the data in proportions. So, for example, there are statistics that are telling us that less than 20% of the people who are infected with, let me come up with a disease, with mumps, actually are able to pass it along. So what you do with statistics is you take a lot of data that's collected by people who are doing a study, and then you work those stats up. So you come away with some percentages or proportions that help people understand what's going on in a particular area. The thing about statistics that is dangerous, though, is that studies can come out and people can interpret statistics any way they want to. The best thing to do if you're reading research or a report about something is to look at the study yourself. Make sure they're not just, using the numbers so it fits what they want to report. Look and see what the real numbers are. Sometimes you'll be really surprised.
Yes, it can be quite subjective. Like 2 out of 10 people did this, that means it's really a big problem. Whereas somebody else would say, only 2 out of 10? That's not a problem. So indeed, you need to interpret those statistics in an objective way. Another example of statistics would be like how many people under the age of 30 voted in the last election. Okay, that would be a statistic, a number that could be interpreted for whatever reasons. So, of course, we've got these statistics. And, of course, according to these statistics from the UN, these could result in some dreadful consequences. And here we got the word consequence. That's just something that happens as the result of something else. If you don't go to see the doctor about a pain in your chest, well, the consequence could be death. You might die of cancer.
Heart attack.
Or a heart attack or whatever. That's the consequence. That's what you face for doing something or not doing something.
Yeah, you'll often hear maybe parents say you've got to face the consequences of your actions. So if you do something wrong, you know, there are usually consequences and they're usually bad, but you have to face them to become an adult. That's what happens when you grow up. You have to face the consequences of your actions. Yeah, so who knows what's going to happen, but there are a lot of people out there predicting. Just make sure you stick with the science and not just what the news is telling you. Sometimes they come up with crazy stories. So that's why many governments are looking for ways to keep their tourism industries afloat. I love this word afloat. Afloat here isn't and then float, separate words. It's one word, and we use it primarily, guys, when we're talking about business. So if you're having a hard time, you just opened your own business up, and maybe COVID hit, and there aren't any people out there buying anything. People were kind of staying at home. You might work really hard to keep your business afloat or keep your business successful so that you don't have to close down your business and declare bankruptcy. So yeah, keep it afloat. We typically don't use this, Tom, do we, to talk about actually floating on top of water. Yeah, It's usually used in a business sense when you're talking about making sure something is successful enough so it doesn't have to shut down or close down or, like I said, go bankrupt, which is something nobody wants to have happen. And we love tourism. People around the world love to travel. I've been, so sad that, I haven't been able to get out and be with friends and family because I know if I leave, it may be difficult to come back in.
Indeed. I think you can use the word afloat to talk about actual boats floating in the ocean, but yes, as you said, it's more often used when we talk about businesses or
industry.
Things like that. So yeah, keeping businesses afloat, keeping them going, keeping them alive, and hopefully we can find those ways to keep those businesses going. For instance, or for example, New Zealand and Australia have pledged to institute a travel bubble or travel corridor between their two countries as soon as it's safe to do so. So that's what New Zealand and Australia are trying to do here. They have promised or pledged to institute a travel bubble. So here we've got institute. You may have heard that as a noun, which could be referring to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, for example, an institute of higher learning. But here it's being used as a verb that just means to start doing something, to institute a new policy.
Yeah, you put it into effect, take action on that. Yeah, they're going to institute a travel bubble. This is new information for me. I hadn't heard this before. You can either call it a travel bubble or a travel corridor. A corridor is another word for hall. If you're walking down a long corridor, there might be doors to the left and to the right. A corridor. In a home, it's a little smaller. I would just call that a hallway or a hall in a home. But maybe at a school or a bigger building, they have these long corridors that you walk through. Anyway, they're using these two naming techniques to talk about what it's going to be like to travel between New Zealand and Australia, which are fairly close to each other. These are two countries that are agreeing to let citizens from one travel to the other and vice versa, which means they can go back and forth. I would like to go visit either of these countries. They look quite beautiful.
They do indeed, but we'll talk about some more particulars about this particular travel arrangement in just a couple of seconds. But right now, we're going to take a break, but stay tuned. We'll be right back. Okay, let's continue talking about COVID-19 and how we're trying to get the tourist industry or the tourism industry back on its feet again to keep it afloat. And we just mentioned the example of New Zealand and Australia. Now, they've promised each other to institute or begin doing this travel bubble or travel corridor between those two countries. And they're going to do it as soon as it's safe to do so. This would allow residents of both countries to travel from one to the other without needing to go into quarantine. So I guess it's probably just restricted to these two countries.
Yeah.
We'll let you guys into our country if you let us into your country, but we're still not going to let other people into our country from places that still have a problem with this disease. So that's one way of opening things up. Just open it up to certain countries or just another partner country. I wonder if Taiwan can do that with somebody else. Taiwan has had a good record in keeping COVID-19 out, but what other country in the area has had a good record as well? Maybe they can have some sort of agreement.
When you talk about a quarantine, I'm sure everyone has heard that word again and again and again over this past year. It just means you're put into a place where you're isolated or separated from other people to keep them safe from you. Or, you say from them. Some people are put into quarantine because they might have a disease that they can pass along to somebody else. But maybe the doctors aren't sure yet, and they'll put them in quarantine while they do the test. So, we've got Vietnam and Thailand, two other countries over here in Asia, and these two rely heavily on tourism. I would think, I'm just going to guess, I thought Thailand's major source of income was actually tourism. They have thousands and thousands and, let's just say millions of people who go to Thailand to see those beautiful temples and eat that great food. And wow, they have great beaches. It's a little hot there, I think. I think people should come on over to Taiwan because our weather's better and it's beautiful and the people are great and we have great food. So, these two countries have been really affected by the shutdown that was, clear of every country was just, for the most part, shutting their borders and just letting their own citizens come back home if they needed to.
Right. So again, this might be some kind of trade-off between the two countries. Vietnamese tourists can go to Thailand and Thai tourists can go to Vietnam as some sort of exchange there if they trust each other and if they have this agreement. We're saying that these two countries have also explored similar schemes. So a scheme here is just some kind of plan, some kind of idea. A lot of times it's negative.
Right.
Like somebody has an evil business scheme or something that they're trying to use to cheat old people out of money or something like that. It's similar to a scam, but again, a scheme is like a plan. And in this case, it's good. They're trying to come up with some sort of plan or agreement so that Thais and Vietnamese people can travel to each other's countries and not have to sit in quarantine.
Sounds like an idea that they want to explore. I know countries are going to open their borders, step by step. It's probably going to be a little safer. We saw Taiwan was starting to allow business people to come in. Of course, they still had to quarantine. But just, slowly introducing other countries into the country might be a little safer. Anyway, they've explored other or similar schemes. Moving on to the next paragraph, it says the idea of opening borders is still far off for countries hit hardest by the virus. I think most countries, when these sort of tragedies or pandemics happen, the first thought for the country, of course, is not the world. It's their own people. It's their country, their citizens they're trying to protect. I remember when we realized that COVID-19 was going to be a big deal here, and we're a lot closer to China. And at the time, the U.S. wasn't paying any attention. I remember Taiwan saying we're no longer exporting masks, face masks, out for to sell to other people. We're going to keep all of our face masks. And I remember thinking, thank you. That was my first thought. Of course, other countries wanted to call Taiwan selfish, but I think when you take care of your own citizens, that's your first priority as a country. We're not one world. We're not one country. You need to take care of your citizens.
Exactly. So, indeed, we've got this problem with other countries that are hit hard by the virus. So, yeah, they're going to have to wait some time before they open their borders. It's still far off for them.
It'll get better.
Yeah, hopefully, of course. And meanwhile, others, including Thailand, are contemplating the establishment of special tourist zones. So if you contemplate something, that means you consider something, you think it over, and they'll think, well, we'll let people in, but we'll only let them go to specific areas so they won't risk spreading the disease all over the country.
Notice here, contemplate is not followed by about, guys. So, yeah, it's like consider something, contemplate something. So that something that follows the verb is going to be a noun. Contemplate is used for more deep thinking. At least in my book, I contemplate the meaning of life. Some of those bigger questions. So, yeah, this is an interesting idea where the local residents of these particular zones or areas of land, along with the foreign tourists who travel there, both these groups would be limited or confined to these areas. If you're confined somewhere, guys, it just means you can't move beyond a certain area. You might be confined to your home if you break your foot. The first couple of weeks are hard to get around. Or you might be confined to jail or prison if you're a criminal. But they would be confined to these areas, meaning the other people in that country would not have any opportunity to come into contact with these folks in these zones. So you would keep at least the other people out of these areas safe from being infected by COVID. That's one way to think about these things. I think it's an idea. I don't think that's a bad idea at all.
It's interesting, although I'm kind of puzzled as to how people would just stay in those areas.
It would be really boring.
Like, imagine if they opened up only Kending, and everybody who lives and works in Kending can never leave there. They've got to stay there all the time. So that sounds kind of unusual, but, we got to think of different ideas here. It's a unique situation that requires some imagination. So, indeed, the tourists and the locals would be confined or restricted to these areas. And this would allow for foreign travel while still keeping a type of quarantine in place. Yeah, that is a kind of quarantine.
Yeah, it is.
Everybody's kind of restricted to a certain place, and they're not allowed to go out and spread the disease to other people.
So here's the last paragraph, another idea. Here's something else that some folks came up with as an idea that they're considering is something called the immunity passport. I actually saw this story here in Taiwan. It's a document. It's not your passport or a stamp in your passport. It's a document that would indicate or let travelers let that country know that the traveler is going to, that they had immunity to COVID-19 or their vaccination status. We don't have a vaccine yet, but they were talking about if you got the vaccine, then you would be allowed to travel. Vaccines don't protect you 100%. You know that, right? We get vaccines and still get sick sometimes. So I'm not sure about that. Immunity means your body is able to fight off some germ or virus that will make you sick. Immunity is a noun. Your immune system is how your body functions. Some people have really good immune systems. I tend to not have a good immune system, so I'm very careful about exercising and eating good food right now. But yeah, that's another idea that they've come up with.
Yeah, for example, so many people have tried to poison me that I have developed an immunity.
Really?
So, yeah, nobody could poison me now. I'm immune to being poisoned. That's just an example here. But yes, this is an idea that some people are thinking about, the immunity passport. And it would be a document that would indicate your immunity status, whether you're immune to COVID-19 or whether you've had a vaccination. And this, of course, will be subject to debate. Is this an invasion of privacy?
Yeah.
Are they trying to keep track of you?
Well, this sounds like China's social policy where if you're not a good person, you can be a green, red, or yellow. And if you are what they consider to be a bad person, you don't wash your hands enough, and your neighbors have told the police on you, you can't travel. This sounds very much like a communist idea here, so I'm not very pro this
1984,
idea.
starting all over again.
Yeah.
However, with years of scientific research needed to turn such a prospect into reality, it's unlikely that immunity passports will find their way into the global spotlight anytime soon. So yeah, we need years of scientific research. So with that research needed, or because we need that research, we don't really have much of a possibility or a prospect. Here, the word prospect does mean a possibility of happening in the future. So yeah, we don't know if such a prospect can be turned into reality because we do need all this information. And we're not really sure if they're going to be really popular, whether they're going to go into the global spotlight. Spotlight, of course, is something that gets a lot of attention.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about prospect for a minute. We use it to talk about job prospects or maybe marriage prospects. Are there any guys that you've been dating that are, possibly going to turn into a spouse? Or job prospects, have you done any interviews lately that look like you might be offered a job in the future? Those are your prospects. And we do use it quite often. Moving on to the final paragraph for now, all that's clear is that significant measures or, types of actions that they're considering and a lot of patience will be needed to get the tourism industry back on its feet. If you get something back on its feet, imagine what that is. Somebody's kind of like they've fallen down and you want to help them back up and get them going again. And that's what that means here. To get something or an industry back on its feet, you want to help them so that they're successful once more. And that's what we're all hoping, at least for the tourism industry around the world, especially here in Taiwan.
Okay, and here I am back on my feet again, and we're on our feet again, and that brings us to the end of our program for today. We wish you all the best of luck in the tourism industry. Hopefully things will return to normal as soon as possible. From all of us here at English Digest, I'm Tom.
I'm Stephanie.
Goodbye.
Bye.